We're going to continue talking about the First Seminole War, and this video is going to deal with December 1817. And there's going to be a lot of events and things that you've probably never heard about in the beginning part of the Seminole War. This is before Andrew Jackson was involved in the war, really before he was in Florida. And the beginning of the 19th century, early 1800s, is just an interesting time in world history. You have the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleonic era defeat of Napoleon. You have the Battle of New Orleans. Of course, in Florida history, we have the destruction of Prospect Bluff, Negro Fort, American attempted invasion of Payne's Prairie during the War of 1812, actually before the war started, known as the Patriot War. So you have all these conflicts going around, confusing political intrigue, changing empires, changing borders, a lot of colorful characters like Pirate John Lafitte in New Orleans history. So it's actually what is there not to like? So anyway, let's do a screen share. Okay, December 1817. Everything hits the fan here in Seminole War history. I mentioned earlier about the Scott Massacre on November 30th, 1817. Two barges of arms supplies going to Fort Scott in Georgia are attacked by Indians from Foultown in revenge to the Americans a week before attacking and destroying Foultown a few miles away from Fort Scott. The barge, it's almost up at Fort Scott, maybe about only a mile or so away, and at night it's attacked along the banks. About 40 people on the boat are killed, men, about half a dozen women, and possibly some children. 6 men survive. Most of those are wounded and eventually get to Fort Scott. For a few of them, it takes a few days. So we're right after that. And of course, on December 2nd, General Gaines reports to the Secretary of War on the event. And General Gaines, he's at Fort Scott while this is all going down, while he's received orders to go to Amelia Island. Amelia Island, Spanish Florida, north of the city of what's now the city of Jacksonville. There are pirates that took over. Look up the history of Gregor McGregor. He was kind of quite a character. I think he's even more outstanding than William Augustus Bowles. He creates a fake country and does like the biggest land fraud or real estate fraud in what's now Belize. But a year before that, he comes to Amelia Island, tries to set up a colony. And the Spanish have been trying to get him. They've been chasing after him since Venezuela. Gregor McGregor married the cousin of Simon Bolivar. And so he has real good political connections with those fighting against the Spanish. So he fled Amelia Island. Some of his pirates are still there. General Gaines is sent by the Secretary of War to go to the Amelia Island and clean things up. Of course, with the Spanish not being consulted about this. So anyway, General Gaines, the Secretary of War, Gaines said that he's been ordered to Point Peter. You'll communicate to the President my earnest desire that I may be permitted to return with a suitable force to Fort Scott and convince the Indians of our ability and willingness to punish them for every aggression on their part. The savage must be taught and compelled to do what is right and to abstain from doing what is wrong. Yeah, really, you can tell what side he's on. Really racial bias here. General Gaines says the poisonous cup of barbarism cannot be taken from the lips of savage by the mild voice of reason alone. The strong mandate of justice must be restored and enforced. Only the Chickasaw have laid aside the scalping knife. Gaines says that he does not want to do this for military fame, but entered the wilderness under orders of Major General Andrew Jackson, with hope that additional force would be sent from Georgia without resorting to the sword. He leaves the command at Fort Scott under Colonel Arbuckle and departs for Fort Hawkins. Another wounded man of Lieutenant Scott's unfortunate party arrives at Fort Scott and made a statement that corresponds with the other. Now, Fort Scott is not named after Lieutenant Scott. It's probably named after General Winfield Scott, just to get that straight. And it was named before Lieutenant Scott was ever in the theater of operations. And another thing, Andrew Jackson is in charge of the military district in the southeastern United States, which covers the border of Spanish Florida that goes to New Orleans. General Jackson is commanding from his home, the Hermitage, near Nashville. General Gaines, his second in command, Lieutenant Colonel Arbuckle at Fort Scott, says that additional instructions are to coordinate with General Jackson when he arrives and work fully within the law. Secretary of War Calhoun writes to General Gaines, and these are all from the Indian Affairs papers and letters to the Secretary of War. What I'm reading from is actually the actual correspondence. I'm not making any of this up. Secretary of War John C. Calhoun writes to General Gaines, says conform with the instructions given. Should the Indians assemble in force on the Spanish side and persevere in committing hostilities in the limits of the United States, you will exercise discretion in crossing the line for the purpose of attacking them and breaking up their towns. So John C. Calhoun is giving Gaines the go-ahead to do what General Jackson would do about 4 months later. And the next letter right after that, Calhoun gets word of the attack on Foultown, and he says it's hoped that they will make the Indians abstain from further depredations. Unfortunately, things go a little bit too far, and the Americans destroy Foultown, and the Indians retaliate and attack the supply boats under Lieutenant Scott. December 14th, 1817, Indian agent David Mitchell to the Secretary of War from the Creek Indian Agency, he's probably writing from Fort Mitchell. This is Fort Hawkins in Georgia. Anyway, Indian agent David Mitchell is called on the creeks. The chief by the name of Little Prince on the Chattahoochee River. He's meeting with him to discuss the Indians between Fort Gaines and the Spanish line. Fort Gaines is an hour's drive north of Fort Scott in Georgia. In Fort Gaines, anything south of that line in Georgia was the Creek land taken in the Treaty of Fort Jackson in 1814. So that's part of the 21 million acres that the United States took from the Creeks. Indian agent Mitchell is talking with the Creeks about conducting war on the Seminoles. The chiefs expressed much regret on the hostilities that should have commenced between the troops under Gaines and Foultown. They said that the Foultown Indians didn't unite with the friendly Indians, nor did they join the Red Sticks. The Seminoles had, by their actions, actually shown that they are separate from the Creeks at this point. The Creek chiefs are willing to join General Gaines and go against the Seminoles. Of course, Indian agent says it's not the desire of the president to go to war with the Seminoles, but that's too late. Treaty chiefs should go down with the Indians between Fort Gaines and the Spanish line, and then go to Miccosukee Town and propose certain terms of peace, and then go against the Negro camp. That means they want to go against the Black Seminoles and raid them and capture slaves. The course was set for Hajo Creek chief to set out a mission to communicate with Miccosukee Town, but when news was received of the attack on the troops of Lieutenant Scott, all attempts at peace are fruitless. Creek Chief William McIntosh is keeping small parties of warriors out to protect the roads and protect travelers. General Gaines has opened up a new road between Fort Montgomery, that's in South Alabama, and Fort Scott, that's kind of an east and west road. General Gaines has spurned the help from David Mitchell. Gaines doesn't trust Mitchell, and unfortunately what Gaines is doing and Mitchell are doing are contrary plans, and they're going to be conflicting with each other. And boy, it will really get ramped up between Mitchell and when General Jackson shows up, but we'll get to that later. General Gaines writes to John Calhoun December 15th. Of course, these letters are all in quick succession. Gaines is at Fort Hawkins, the photograph you see here. Gaines is awarded a gold medal by order of the president. He considers the medal a public property of the nation and not his own. He wishes any motto to be in plain English. During the last war, a standard of colors was given to Gaines by the ladies of Tennessee. It had the motto, victory or death. General Gaines would like to make this his motto, or I guess his slogan, victory of death. I'm sorry, victory of death, not victory or death. Victory of death, whatever that means. Gaines says when next he visits Charleston, he'll have a likeness done of him for the medal. That's where all the artists and engravers are in Charleston. There's really not a down here in South Georgia and Florida. Gaines writes to John C. Calhoun the same day from Fort Hawkins, says he's inspected the Georgia militia troops. They look well. The Seminoles believe that they cannot be beaten. And most of the letter is difficult to read, but it appears he's saying that since the death of Lieutenant Scott in the party, the international boundary between Georgia and Spanish Florida will not stop him from pursuing the Indians. Gaines feels that he will not meet any opposition. And the next day, there's a letter from John C. Calhoun. Of course, he hasn't received these other letters yet. He says if the Seminole Indians still refuse to make reparations for their outrages and depredations, reparations for depredations, that's a tongue twister. He says, you are at liberty to march across the Florida line and attack them within its limit, unless they should shelter themselves under a Spanish fort. In that event, you immediately notify this department. That once again, another letter from John C. Calhoun saying that they have permission to go down in Florida and attack the Indians there, which will be what General Jackson does. And so that is to prove that it's not all Jackson's idea. Okay, the next we have Major Muhlenberg to Fort Scott near Ochessee Town on the Apalachicola River. He was bringing up transports attacked by Indians on both sides of the river with heavy fire, small arms, and it's continued. 2 of his men are killed, 13 wounded. Unknown if any of the enemy is injured. We're compelled to remain here, as it is impossible for a man to show himself above the bulwark. The wounded are in a bad situation. The keelboats under Captain Clinch will make their best speed to Fort Scott. They only have a few provisions on hand. What that is, Major Muhlenberg stuck at Ochessee Bluff, here on the Apalachicola River, about a dozen or so miles down from where Lieutenant Scott was attacked. They have some keelboats full of supplies, and they can't make it up to the river because they have to go against the current. They have to throw a rope around a tree and pull their way up the river. Very slow, but they're being shot at by Indians, and Black Seminoles on both sides, so they can't show themselves above the bulwark of the boat, and they're stuck there for 2 weeks. Captain Clinch and some armored keelboats has gone up to Fort Scott and tried to get help, and I guess they're almost out of food. And so that's the Ochessee Bluff, which I have behind me as the virtual background. Okay. Colonel Arbuckle writes to the Secretary of War from Fort Scott in Georgia. He says General Gaines has left him in command of the post. There's no movement against the Seminoles. He says the enemy is concentrated about 30 miles below this post against the vessels commanded by Major Muhlenberg. Okay, so Ochessee Bluff's about 30 miles below Fort Scott. Arbuckle has a large enough force to defend and navigate vessels accompanied by an armed keelboat. Captain Blackstone left here with provisions for them. They're sending armored keelboats to arrive, and they may arrive down there 8 or 10 days by wind. They've commenced to build large keelboats that will carry 300 to 400 barrels of supplies. They have 20 days of meat rations at Fort Scott, flour in greater supply. No word from General Gaines or a battalion of Georgia volunteers or the Friendly Creek Chiefs under Chief McIntosh. Nearly every Indian south and east is at war with us. A great number from the Chattahoochee and elsewhere are joining them daily, joining the Miccosukes, and several hundred Negroes are armed and fighting. The war will need a much bigger force to bring it to a speedy and favorable termination. Capache Miko, or the principal chief of Miccosukee Town, is head of the hostile Indians, is made prisoner and presumed to have killed 2 Indian traders, Hambly and Doyle. Actually, they didn't kill them, they survived, but he didn't know that at that point. Another letter 3 days later from Major Muhlenberg, still stuck in Ochessee Bluff, not able to move. He says if they can't wait any longer, they'll just drop down river, go to Apalachicola Bay. Colonel James Bankhead in Georgia to George Graham, acting Secretary of War from Port Peter in Georgia. This is December 20th, 1817. It says the evacuation of the army post at Fernandina has been delayed due to Captain Henley, who has not arrived yet. His ship is off the bar and will arrive soon. They have 2 small howitzers and will send a morning report. Not heard anything of Captain Wilson since he's still at Fort Johnson, North Carolina. He's anxious for the intention of the government to take possession of Fernandina should be communicated to existing authority there through the organs appointed for that purpose, and therefore lost not a moment in getting to this place. The post return shows a total of 204 American soldiers present, 13 absent. So the Americans want to take over Fernandina, and tell the Spanish, well, we're going to take it off your hands and settle all that trouble. Spanish aren't going to be too happy about that, which we'll mention in a minute. Same day, December 20th, 1817, Colonel Arbuckle writes to General Gaines from Fort Scott. He's received no information from Fort Gaines except by an Indian runner of the Georgia militia or McIntosh's Indians. Word that Major Muhlenberg is still under attack and will reach Fort Scott in 8 or 10 days by wind. The hostile forces, number 800 to 1200, said they have killed Hambly and Doyle, which of course is not true. Word received by Chief William Perryman. Any Indians who refuse to join the hostiles on the Chattahoochee below Fort Gaines are forced to remove. The present war will need much great force to end it. Kapachi Miko is the principal chief of Miccosukee town in command of the hostile Indians. A large keelboat is being raided for service. Fort Hughes has been abandoned because of lack of supplies. When the Americans attacked Foultown and took the Indians' cattle and corn and supplies, took it back up to Fort Gaines. The Georgia militia established Fort Hughes in what's now Bainbridge, Georgia. There's some great interpretive signs up there if you ever go visit. That's kind of northwest of Bainbridge on the Flint River. So it was manned for about a month, and now it's been abandoned there. Next day, December 21st, Colonel Arbuckle to General Gaines from Fort Scott. The keelboat has arrived with some more wounded. Major Muhlenberg states that's impossible to get up, and they are under constant fire from Indian and Negroes on both sides of the river. If the boat does not return soon, he'll drop down to the bay. I'll try to move to him by the keelboats. Okay, so we're going pretty quick here. There, Major Muhlenberg's just stuck in there, right in front of Fort Scott. So let's go to Fort Gaines. This is a blockhouse at Fort Gaines, Georgia, which is just north of Chattahoochee, Florida. Actually, it's about an hour north along the Chattahoochee River. Robert Irwin to Alexander Cummings, Captain 4th Infantry at Fort Gaines. Is anxious to know the movements of the militia and the Indians. An Indian brought from Fort Mitchell to Fort Hawkins and expressed that there is considerable confusion among the militia. They've refused to march. The agent has told the Indians, that's David Mitchell, has told the Indians that General Gaines has no business to go to the Indian towns and fire on them at night, that he acted like the Indians themselves in doing so. Chief McIntosh came to Fort Mitchell, but the agent sent him home, told him to come back to the agency for a talk in 30 days and not to move until he receives orders from the government. Anastasio is told that he was doing wrong to be in service of the country until the agent gave him orders. The agent sent a talk to the Seminoles, to the chiefs to meet him. They would make peace with them and the white people. There's been no response. There are 285 people at Fort Gaines. General Gaines directs to build a cornhouse, but the people have no disposition to do so or to take any advice to do anything. Alexander Arbuthnot's son is with the Indians, instructing them to take the traders Doyle and Hambly. At Fort Gaines, they purchased one of the U.S. guns from one of the Perrymans, which was taken from Lieutenant Scott's boat. The Indians say they know the names of all the officers on the river. So that's quite a letter there. Indian agent David Mitchell is going directly under the efforts of General Gaines, in fact, going opposite and telling the Indians not to obey General Gaines. The Georgia militia is getting contrary orders, and they're confused. They're not wanting to do anything. So it's quite a mess. December 27th, Lieutenant Colonel Arbuckle to General Gaines, a letter from Captain Merwin. A boat has returned from the Apalachicola River. No men have been killed or wounded other than those previously reported. No information on the Georgia militia or Chief McIntosh and his Indians except what is enclosed. No provision received. So Colonel Arbuckle's probably getting mad that he's not getting any more troops or soldiers and no provisions. They're still running out of food. W.G. Blount to John C. Calhoun, December 29th, 1817. Says General Gaines requests the Cherokee force to assist them. It can be commanded by Colonel Morgan, who commanded the Cherokees at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. So Gaines is asking for Cherokee allies, which nothing will come of that. Meanwhile, the the Spanish governor in St. Augustine of East Florida, Governor Jose Coppinger, to the commander of forces in Fernandina. The letter was in Spanish. Of course, they had to translate it. And of course, the Americans didn't have good translation. Governor Coppinger to the commander in chief of the naval and land forces of the United States residing in Amelia Island says, it has come to my notice that the forces of the United States of America under your command have taken possession of the town of Fernandina of this province, dislodging the gang of thieves who occupied it. Under what pretext has such an enterprise been taken, and the designs or results be expected? So Spanish governor says, thanks for getting rid of those rascals and those gang of thieves and pirates, but what are you guys doing there, and what do you plan on doing? You know, what are your designs? So General Gaines writes to John C. Calhoun from Amelia Island. He says, things are peaceful, so return to Fort Scott by way of Hartford, Georgia. And that was on December 30th, 1817. So you can see that December 1817 was quite an interesting time. Not so much for fighting, you just have that one battle of Ochessee Bluff where the American boats just under siege and stuck on the river. But a lot of political back and forth and confusion and sides not wanting to do what theirs doing. So, you know, just more of that in 1818. So I hope you enjoyed that. And this will be enough for now.